I swear there is always some type of noise happening when I'm recording, like anything at this point. But you know what? At this point, I'm embracing it. And let's just say it adds character to my show. The birds, the noises, the dog barking, the random whatever noises, it adds character, right? So if you hear any noises, it is what it is. Done is better than perfect, and the message is more important. So quick backstory before I get into the interview with Akilah. Akilah is a lawyer, an intellectual property lawyer, and I invited her today on the show to really bring perspective to a situation that happened in September of 2019. Now, at the time of this recording, it's the 18th of June, and this episode is clearly long overdue, but it's here nonetheless. And it's really good that it's being released now because now I can actually bring perspective of what has happened since, which I will conclude in the outro. So in September of 2019, I got a message in my Facebook page on my Facebook page, which I'm going to read now. And it came from I can't pronounce this. De Silava Dobreva. If I butchered her name, if she's listening to this, I'm sorry, but I got that message and her name, and this is the message. Hello, just wanted to let you know the term, the branding queen, has been trademarked by me, and you will be receiving a letter from my lawyer to ask you to stop using this name for your business in any capacity. All right, that is the message that I got. Now, for some context, for those of you who aren't familiar with me or my brand, I had been coined the branding queen because that's the brand that I built for myself. That's like when you become so known for something, you start to be coined certain names. And if this is an alignment with the brand that you're trying to cultivate, then by all means embrace it. And that's what was so important to me about the name. Not the name, the actual term, the branding queen, but it was something that my audience, my community, you guys coined me. It's because that's the value that I showed up with day after day, going live on Facebook, the content that I was putting out in a specific local entrepreneurship group, as well as my Facebook group. All right. And that is what happens when you add value to your community and to those around you, like those who are experiencing you. Once you show up as that authority in your field, people are going to know you for that thing. And this is why I cannot emphasize how important content creation is, whether that's via your blog, YouTube, podcast, social media like Instagram and Facebook. Show up and assert your authority by being a thought leader and putting out content with value. All right. And because I was doing that since 2016, right? People started calling me the branding queen. And as such, I started to go by personal branding. So I started to go by my name, Cassia Marina, and more primarily it was the branding queen. So my Facebook page was named the branding queen, and I purchased my domain in 2016, brandingqueen.me. Right. So when I launched my website, I think at the beginning of 2016 or maybe 2015, I can't remember. The name of my website was more of a studio type name. But then I realized, keeping a pulse on how people are responding to my business and my brand, I realized that people connected with me more on a personal level. And that's when I just embraced the branding queen, because people didn't refer to my business by the business name. They either referred to me by Cassia, and then they would call Cassia the branding queen. So that's when I embraced the term and I was like, hey, I'm purchasing this domain and I'm going to build on this brand name. And then coming down at the beginning of 2019 is when I just started to I don't know, I just was no longer resonating with the term the branding queen as much. And it's not that I wanted to ditch it completely, but I wanted to nurture more the personal brand from a Cassia Marina perspective. So I purchased cassiamarina.me. And the way that you can set things up is that you can have your social media be the branding queen, and your website could still be brandingqueen.me. And then I have both domains, and they both point to the same address. So if you type in brandingqueen.me, it's going to take you to my website, and my primary domain is casamarina.me. So there's ways, and this is where online branding and being a branding strategist specifically for online, but in general. This is where a bit of strategy comes into play, which I won't get too deep into now. But if this is something that kind of piques your interest, you can definitely get in touch with me and we can discuss further, or you can ask questions. Send in your questions. I'll be happy to respond and answer them. But this is just a little snippet and insight into online branding strategies and how you can structure your brand in a way that makes sense and doesn't add confusion into the minds of your audience, your target audience, and just anybody who's tuned into you, right? So I started moving away from the name, but I was easing out of that on my own already. So when that happened in September of 2019, it was well, thank God I started moving away from it, right? In one aspect, because I had already started using Cassia Marina on Facebook, and I had already started using, actually, no, not on Facebook. I started using that as my domain, but my Facebook page was still Branding Queen, which is why I figure she found me and she just did a search on Facebook for anybody using the name, because she registered that as a trademark only 2 months prior, right? After doing my research, this is new. And I'm going to give my closing thoughts on what I think about her sending me that. And if I actually got a letter and what the letter said, I will share that in the end of this podcast episode and what my thoughts are on that whole scenario. So anyway, all of that happened. And I mean, of course, I was a little bit shaken up, but I wasn't scared because I had to wait for a letter to come and all of that anyway. So, but it did take me aback. Of course, if you're using something and it's near and dear to your heart, you're going to feel a little bit cheated. And I had to talk about it. So I took to Akilah's Facebook group, Let's Talk Intellectual Property, and I shared my experience and basically advising people if you are really trying to build a huge brand of impact and it's really serious to you, then definitely take all measures to protect your brand. I mean, I know it's an investment, but definitely look into it and don't overlook this important step. So without further delay, I guess we're just gonna get straight into it. Welcome to Tea Time, the podcast. I am Cassia Marina, fondly known as the Branding Queen, and I am a digital branding expert helping businesses get online and thrive doing so. I am passionate about sharing my knowledge through content creation like this podcast, online classes and workshops, as well as through the services of my branding agency to help you develop your online systems. Think of this podcast as the place to get the latest advice, strategies, tips, news, and inspiration on building your brand online using the tools available to us, but most importantly, thought-provoking content to improve your mindset, to maximize on these tools and put context to day-to-day developments in the online world of business with a little bit of tea dishing facts and sass, because I really want you to thrive online. So thank you so much for tuning in. Let's begin. Hi, Akilah. Welcome to Tea Time, the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us for this interview.
Thanks for having me, Cassia. It's always a pleasure to connect and to talk through some of the finer points as it relates to intellectual property and specifically in this instance, online brand protection.
Yes, so, in this digital age, it becomes very blurry. How do you go about protecting your brand? But before we get into that, introduce yourself to the audience about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So I am Akilah Phillip, and I am an entertainment attorney, intellectual property specialist. So I specialize, in copyright specifically, as well as trademark registration, creation, and the most ideal branding tool and the most ideal brand representation that can help you in terms of registering your mark in a digital space. I really run an online law firm. So my law firm caters to any Caribbean entrepreneur, any part of the world. My business is headquartered in Trinidad and Tobago, but I operate exclusively in a digital space.
Okay, great. I really wanted to touch on that because I just, because of my background and I really push for digital business, online business, and that you aren't limited to just where you reside. I just wanted, the listeners to grab that. So just give us like a brief introduction on trademark and why we should trademark our business or our brand, I should say. And how do we protect it?
Oh boy, that is such a loaded question, Catherine.
I'm sorry.
I don't know where to start. I mean, since I, as I said, I operate in a digital space, and the first step towards getting online is having a mark that you can be identified by. And when I mean mark, trademark just is the long-term mark, is the AKA. And yes, you might have a business name, and oftentimes persons mistake business name for
a brand.
Trademark. Yes, for your brand. Your company's name is separate and apart from what your brand name is and how you are known and identified through all your visual identifiers. And I'm referring to everything from your logo to your slogan, to your mascot, to your brand colors. All those things, I can't stress enough, does not necessarily have to be the same name as your business name. And the more unique these things are, the better for your branding, just outside of the digital space as well as in the digital space. Because most times business owners tend to have very descriptive business names.
Yeah, that is true. One thing I always I'm blown away by when talking in my content or even just through consultations or workshops is that so many people don't understand that there's a difference between your business name and your brand name. And it's like, as soon as I use the analogies or I point out, like, just when you look at like a soft drink, you'll see the name of the company might be SM Jalil, but the drink is Buster, which is a brand, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and that's I mean that's the simple and easiest
Simplest
way
way
to
to convey,
explain it.
yeah.
And I would take a cue from that and use the analogy of in terms of finding a unique identifier. I always defer to Microsoft. I always defer to Apple products
Mm-hmm.
because Apple, in its literal meaning, is totally different from what the brand representation is and how it is
Yeah,
used. So, try to think outside of the box and use things that doesn't necessarily refer to your goods, services, or products.
right. So in other words, for those who might not be quite following, for example, Apple built a brand around an apple, but it's a tech company. You would never think that. You would think that you would name that after somebody in the food industry. And
Mm.
why are these categories important?
Right. So categories are important because trademarks are registered in various classes of goods and services. Um, I can't remember the amount of services and goods it falls into off the top of my head, but if you anybody could Google online and go and see these classes, and you would
Mhm.
see the range of goods and services that your trademark is going to fall into when you actually go to register it.
Yeah, so I was on a webinar, and I think a really good example, which made a lot of sense to me, is Dove. There's Dove, the soap brand, and then there's Dove, the chocolate brand.
Mm-hmm.
And some people might not understand, well, hey, how come two companies own a Dove brand? And I guess that would be because they are in two different categories, right?
Yeah, they own the brand and they have registered the brand in various classes. So, if let's say something I tell most of my clients when they come to me for trademark advice and just clarity in terms of how they want to proceed, I try to ask them to project the brand in its widest capacity, to think about how far this
Mm.
could go. Dream the impossible, dream. If you can do anything with the brand, what would you like the brand to do? And list those services or products, merchandising, etc. And that is the first cue as to tell me as the attorney what classes you'll be looking at to put the brands into the brand into these specific classes for registration.
Okay. All right. So let's get to the exciting part of things because I know they're dying to know why I am giving up the branding queen and that whole persona of the branding queen. So as you know, you're aware with the situation, what happened, you
Yes,
saw the message,
I
and it
did.
was such a learning lesson for everyone inside of your Facebook group. Shameless plug, she has
Did.
a Facebook group. It's called Let's Talk Intellectual Property. So you guys can go check that out. But I was really happy to share that because I didn't realize how much other people in the group would have benefited from it.
Yes,
And
and me neither. I didn't, I was happy you did because then it allows people to see a very real and a practical example with even people messaging
Mhm.
me privately to ask specific questions because most times when it comes from an attorney, it seems abstract. But
Right.
when it comes from somebody who's actually going through the situation, then it's relatable.
And not only that, we usually only tend to get our house in order when it happened to the neighbor. It hits
True.
close to home. So now it's like, oh my goodness, this could happen to me. Like it could really happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. So on the topic of the branding queen, I was at first very upset and taken aback because I felt like branding queen is such a generic term. And how I um justify that as well is that there's so many people who use terms loosely online. There's the whole Instagram, because Instagram is popping, Instagram queen. Everybody's something. And we all give ourselves these titles to really convey our area of specialty. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but I always say this and I don't take credit for it at all. I didn't decide to call myself the branding queen. It's just that when you're so good at what you do, people associate something with you and they start giving you a title or giving you a name. And that's how you know you are engaging in the right brand activities. And as I would show up through my content and always educate on branding in my Facebook group, other Facebook groups, and on even on my Facebook page, people just started naturally calling me the branding queen. And I was like, okay, cool, I'll build a brand around this if this is what people are identifying me with, which I encourage others to do that as well. But still, you still got to do your research. But at the point in time, branding queen was not trademarked. And I didn't even bother to trademark it because it seemed like such a general term or generic, however, you know. So to my surprise now, 2 months ago, someone successfully trademarked the name, and now I just kind of have to cease and desist.
Well, I mean, that's really loaded because there are a lot of things that, again, there are a lot of things, legal things to dissect in what you're saying there, because trademarks, at least in Trinidad and Tobago, are still it's jurisdictional. And when I say jurisdictional, I mean that registering a trademark in the particular country that you're in gives you rights in that jurisdiction. Now, if you register a trademark in, let's say, the US, for instance, the US is signed on to something called the Madrid Protocol. So you can register in the United States, and that will be your home country of registration, and do a designation in various countries where you can get reciprocal protection. We are still to go through the finalizing process of having that implemented into our legislation and actually applied, whereby it will, let's say you register in Trinidad and Tobago and then you decide to designate, well, you know what, Cassie is going to be the branding queen in Belgium, in Greece, etc. And you have that reciprocal protection in those countries. I hope this makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense for me. Hopefully the listeners are following.
Yeah, so it just simply means.
But my question would be, how does that play out in the world of today, the world of technology?
And that is where I'm going to, because that is where I have to go to in terms of, okay, having the trademark now, you own that in that country, so you are governed by that country's laws. That takes you to the next step of having the domain, which is what it is you have. You have the domain in that would have been you would have obtained the domain, and it's not country specific to say, you know, .tt. So it's not, yes.
Oh, that's a very good point that you made there, because that's another thing I talk about. Like, I always keep telling people, if we are online, don't limit yourself. The whole purpose of getting a website and being online is to access a wider market than your local economy. So I guess that's another benefit of having a domain that doesn't tie you down to, you know.
Well, I mean, I might hold a different view, because from a legal perspective and in terms of really honing into a particular market, I think having that .tt is very beneficial, or .us or .co, etc., because you want to be able to be found online where you have the most customers. So your domain being .me or not, or having a extension that is not really specific to any country jurisdiction, then it comes now to be governed by what is called the Uniform Dispute Resolution Policy, where if she does decide to let's say pursue further action, it will go before the well, it have various platforms where disputes are resolved, but it can be taken to WIPO, for instance, and they decide, well, you know what, let's review, let's see if there is sufficient grounds here for us to transfer the domain to that complainant.
Okay, so I see your point in terms of having the domain, but in terms of like just having it, as you were telling me, my portfolio, I think it's good to have it, you know, but at the same time, from a branding perspective, if you are trying to do commerce not just locally but also regionally or internationally, when you have things like .tt, it, especially as a third world country, it just looks as though, well, okay, they are only doing business in that space. So
no, well, yeah, of course.
feel like from a branding perspective, you want to position yourself as somebody who's doing.
Well, that's why you have. Anywhere. But then again, you don't want to just limit yourself to. I mean, yes, traditionally, .com has been the most sought after extension, but you know, it's been open. Extensions have been opening up so much that you can have .website, .shop, .top. But I mean, for a commercial perspective, you can still have the .co.tt to identify that, you know, this is probably where the brand might be headquartered. This could have the .com, yes, but acquire the .tt or acquire the .us, because you don't want somebody to come along or come before, if you're not a registered trademark for that brand, as in your case, and come now and, you know, obtain it, realize, you know what, this person doesn't have a registered mark in Trinidad and Tobago. Yeah. And you know what, let me obtain this .tt and start doing business.
Right. So yeah, that's essentially what I was saying. From a portfolio perspective, you just have it so that you secure it as your as an ownership.
Yes. Yes.
But and I mean, all right. So my next question. Essentially, what would be the takeaway you would want listeners to take away for branding yourself in a digital age?
Oh boy. You come in with these loaded questions, and I can't just give you one, two answers.
I know, but I'm just saying, answer it in its simplest form. But obviously,
in its simplest
people
form,
will have to speak with you to get more specific.
Yes, in its simplest form, I can say, okay, one, you know, maintain your image, be consistent, use your registered trademarks, which takes you to the question that you asked about offline and online. So it starts from first deciding what the brand is going to do, coming up with something that is not generic, registering that brand name, getting your trademark sorted out where you're doing business, and then moving from there to actually owning the domains associated with that brand. Own your domains. Own your domains.
Even if it means having multiple for
because
international and local. And
if you cannot, for some unforeseeable reason, register your trademark and you own the domains, then you would be operating via an unregistered mark, and that still gives you common law rights in Commonwealth jurisdictions, and in some other jurisdictions referred to as nascent rights, whereby you are recognized as being the owner of this particular brand. And by owning the domain, it just further enhances the strength of your argument. So don't let trademark registration ever stop you from owning your domain in a digital space, if that is where you see your business progressing.
Okay. Yeah, because I've spoken with a couple of business owners, you know, over time, doing consultations for to see who is a good fit and stuff like that. And I get to learn that there are many people who have businesses. They might have a business in Trinidad, they have their business in Jamaica, and they have clients in both regions. So in cases like that, I would have found myself just saying, well, here, just have the .com. But
No,
you know,
no.
now I'm understanding that it's good to have that international brand, which is the .com, but then have the .tt, have
Yes,
the dot,
because
well, whatever
which
Jamaica
takes
would
me,
be. Yeah.
takes me to, I mean, there are many elements to this, but it takes me to the point that after ownership, make sure you have the right security for the domains for your site, and well, however you decide to use it, if you decide to use it, because there's so much things online, phishing, cyber criminals, all these different elements, but actually securing your brand as it grows. From the time it starts growing, then it's going to be susceptible to these type of individuals. So don't give them an opportunity to now come and benefit from your hard work. Take in front, as we say in Trinidad, before before in front take you. So
Right.
it will be very good to make sure that your portfolio ownership of these domains is part of your brand protection plan. Yeah.
Plan.
Yeah, your
Okay.
brand protection plan.
So when it comes to my situation, how do you think I could have protected myself, or I don't know, just anything
Well, I
else you
mean,
want
in
to
your
add on
situation,
that scenario
I think,
that would be valuable for listeners to know?
I mean, even if you had a registered mark in Trinidad and Tobago, okay, I think in this particular case, if you had it at, let's say, brandingqueen.co.tt, it would have, it strengthens your position, even without the registered trademark, because now she would have to come to the dispute policy as it relates to the .tt and what governs that .tt dispute where that domain type is used.
So is there a difference between doing, because a lot of Trinidadians do this, is, for example, brandingqueent.tt.com.
Yeah, and you know what? No, it's the .com. No, the .com is the extension. So the TT in front wouldn't really
It would not help.
No. Is the .tt. No, the dot is it the end extension is what it is would be considered.
Wow. Okay. Because like, whereas in the States you can purchase a .ca, which is Canada. I think Australia is .au, UK is .uk, .com is pretty,
It's very, I
international.
mean, in
And
your
then there's
case,
just
go
no, but
ahead.
there's .us. But then for the .tt, like, for some reason it's so expensive in comparison to how much you have to pay abroad or
But
else internationally.
yeah.
Like, why is it like this?
Well, I mean, I went to, I can't remember where the registry is located, because I did look at they are in Port of Spain. I think I want to believe it's on Edward Street, and I haven't gone in to source all the information, but it is available online as to what the registry requires you to have in order to obtain the .tt. But in just taking my mind back to your particular situation, all is not lost, because having a registered mark, having a registered trademark for Brandon Queen doesn't guarantee that she can tell you to stop using Branding Queen in the digital space, because if you have been using the brand offline and being known as the branding queen long before she obtained the trademark rights. So that's why it's very it's not a clear-cut case as okay, she sent you this letter and oh my gosh, everything is done. No, that's just not how it works, because for the .com, well, because I think it's .me, right? You said your site is .me?
Yeah.
.me, right. It will have to be taken through the if she decides to pursue that, taken through the UDRP policy, which will go through WIPO, and they will have to review to see if you obtain the domain and you have been acting in bad faith. Bad faith requires to show that you have been using the domain for commercial.
Recently.
Well, no, not even recently. The Uniform Domain Resolution Policy requires bad faith in the sense of trying to benefit off of her trademark rights. You've been, trying to send traffic to your site impersonating her. All those elements have to be proven. So just obtaining a cease and desist letter is just what I would like to say, scare tactic.
Right. I agree with you. I honestly agree with everything that you just said.
Yeah, it's just a scare tactic because it's very costly to actually
follow through.
Yes.
And I mean, I'm not only from just a costly perspective, but I honestly think it's kind of like a waste of time.
Yeah, and domain acquisition and trademark rights are again two separate things. You have sometimes persons who have trademark rights. Let's say what year is this? 2019. They just acquired trademark rights for a particular brand, but somebody decided to use the domain name since 1980 and they've been operating and doing business, etc. But they never registered their rights. The person who came in 2019 and got a trademark in a particular class or service, etc., cannot necessarily come and tell the person who has a domain since 1980, hey, you need to stop using that domain. It just doesn't work. So it just doesn't work.
And here's the thing that I'd add, right? Well, which just supports what you just said, is I've been using this domain for quite a while now, long before she would have filed for the trademark. And in addition to looking through her profile, she does not use the term in any big way. You know, it's just like a one-liner here and there. So how serious are you about it, this trademark, when you don't even use it as your domain?
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. It's so many classes to online brand protection. It moves from, as I have been preaching in my group and just on every platform that I can, own your trademark. Let's start at the space level.
It's like, I spent all this money on it. Let's put it to use. Let's send out cease and desist.
Yeah, let's start by owning a trademark. And then from there, let's get into the online, figuring out how can we use this mark. And that's how I try to direct my clients' mind. So taking it into an online space,
right,
you can explore many things, and that's where the domain comes into question, because as I said, owning a domain doesn't necessarily grant the it grants the domain owner a lot of rights, but it might necessarily align with the trademark owner's rights.
Wow, that's good. That's good. Okay, so I am glad that this gave a lot of context for persons who might be confused or wondering, like, what form of recourse that they have if something like this were to happen to them, or does it even make sense to trademark in Trinidad if someone's from a totally different country, not even native to the US, by the way, just comes in and wants to tell me I can't use it.
Trademark in the country
all is not lost.
No, all is not lost. And please trademark in the country where you do most of your business, because that is where your market is. And whenever you get to the point of doing import, export, or you get to the point of well, let's say our laws align with reciprocal rights, then you can always come to your the trademark office and say, well, hey, I would like to have my mark registered in these various jurisdictions, and then you get priority rights from the date you would have registered in Trinidad and Tobago. You can claim that priority date. It will, and in its simplest sense, it goes back to the 1980 and 2019 example that I gave you.
Okay. And it's just, it really is one heck of a situation, because it's so funny. Just in June, before she would have been granted, ownership, I was looking into it, So I have been always like looking it up. Like I looked at it when I started using it. It was available. I even looked at it just out of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I mean, that is just a scare tactic, because I mean, all the facts of the case is that I cannot see that being a very strong case that she would win before in a UDRP action, in, let's say, if she were to take it before WIPO. I can't see that happening, just based on the circumstances, based on the fact that she hasn't been using the domain in any meaningful way. This is a domain that has been used from, well, I can't remember. I don't know how long you've been using it, and
domain as well as artwork.
Yeah, and you've been known by this name and operated in this space for a considerable period of time.
And I don't see that on her platform.
I mean, does she have any kind of domain with the similar name or any
From
type
the two domains she operates under, no, she doesn't. Maybe she might have ownership of it, because as we were researching, it's not available, but it's not used.
Right.
Nobody's using it. There's not even like a parking of the domain. There's no splash page. It's just that when you go on GoDaddy, it's not available. When you go on any of the places to purchase a domain, it's not available.
Yeah, and it's just like multiple layers of what you're saying. So I think it's just, persons need to start with the basics of taking your brand seriously and thinking about protecting it as you move it from just being known in the country or amongst the industry that you're in, and moving it into a digital space.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, branding speaks for itself, right? At the end of the day, branding is not who you say you are, but what people call you. And this just emphasizes, again, my earlier point. Like, I didn't come up with the name. People called me that. And it's probably not going to stop. No matter what I do, what cease and desist letter, because even with the people who I've shared this with, it's just like even reluctant of them to just stop calling me the branding queen. Like, that's just what it is. I can't stop that.
Right. And again, as I said, it's really two different spaces that you're operating in terms of domain. You have the trademark, then you have the domain layer. So if I can't emphasize this as strongly as possible, it will have somebody who has a domain from 1979 and probably never registered that brand. If somebody comes but they own the domain though, or they realize the internet was picking up, and I probably going to at some point in time I want to get online, and they decided, okay, I'm going to create this domain, etc. And somebody came years later and registered the trademark. That person who registered the trademark will have trademark rights, let's say, operating the classes I mentioned earlier. But if they want that domain from that person, they are going to have to pay a hefty price.
Yes. Yeah.
It's really a complex issue to dissect.
Yeah. So one of my major takeaways, which you said earlier, is register your domain.
Yeah, at its
Definitely.
simplest. At its
It's
simplest.
Yeah. The sooner you can do it by based on what you said is the better. So that
Yeah,
if you
I
do
mean,
end up in a situation like that, you
yeah,
have that common law
you have your common law
aspect.
rights, yeah, and you've been trading as, you've been known as. So register your domain is the best way to start thinking about acquiring all those. While it might be a tangible asset, it's just putting an intangible asset, being the brand name that you can't actually touch or feel, but putting it in a tangible form by acquiring something that is attached to it.
So how can listeners get in touch with you if they have more questions?
Well, you can always find me on Facebook, Let's Talk Intellectual Property Limited, or on Instagram. And I can probably share a sneak peek since I haven't really told anybody. But I will give you a preview that I am soon having something for specifically Caribbean people, Caribbean rights, Caribbean based
Sounds exciting.
brands. So, you can follow me on those platforms, and you will find out more in the next couple of weeks, literally, as I try to continue to educate our Caribbean demographic as we move into a digital
Totally.
space and
Yeah.
age. Yeah.
So, if you want to connect with Akilah since the recording of that interview, she has since launched her website, which is letustalkip.com. I'm going to link to that in the show notes as well if I just got it wrong for some reason, but I believe that is the website. It is letustalkip.com. But double check in the show notes, okay? So in closing, what happened since? So what happened since it basically confirmed my feelings back then. Like after I had a chance to really sit with it and think it over, like really ponder that email, and I did my research and I realized, okay, she only registered this trademark 2 months prior to sending me that message. So your trademark is relatively new, one. And two, after like scouring her entire website, her social media, she doesn't really use the branding queen in any real way. She does have a promo video where people say like her clients have said she truly is the branding queen and things like that, but she doesn't use it in a major way the way that I do or did. Even today, having moved away from the name, I still use it in a greater capacity than she does. Maybe that has changed since because I haven't like looked at her stuff like that since. But unless she was coming out with some new offering, that would make sense. But like if at the point in time I wanted to explore registering the trademark locally and even internationally, like Akilah said, and filing some type of, I can't remember the term that she used, but if I wanted to contest it, essentially, I had a lot of grounds to be quite honest, because I mean, this is just opinion, and these people can rule for and against for the slightest, weakest reasons, So unless it happens, I can't say for sure. But the point is, looking at her social media, looking at the terminology that she uses it here and there, but she has so many other things that she uses in a big way that it's like, why haven't you trademarked that instead? She has a membership, she has a group coaching program, and all memberships, group coaching programs have their names, but yet it's not named the Branding Queen membership or anything. It's named something totally different, nothing relevant to the term branding or queen, like nothing remotely relevant. And it's like you have all of these other names and terms that are more to the forefront of your brand. Like, why did you register it? One, I mean, that's your prerogative. Maybe she had something coming out or a line. But outside of that, like, was it that? To me, it didn't seem that serious. That's my opinion. It's not that serious, and I'm gonna say straight up, it seemed to be a form of bullying. Like, you now got this trademark. What am I infringing upon? You don't have any artwork of the branding queen. You don't use it like that. Like, what am I infringing upon? Right? In one aspect. And two, I've been using this before you. So even if I was infringing upon anything, yeah, I've been using this like years before, So I should have taken the opportunity to trademark it, but to be quite honest, it's not that important to me. I did explore the option of registering it locally, but I have been through the trademarking process somewhat through a organization that I was part of, and it's like with anything else in the Caribbean, it's so tedious dealing with government agencies, and it just wasn't worth the time and effort, to be quite honest. Especially as I'm more interested in building the Cassia Marina name and just building that personal brand more. The next update is, did I ever get a letter? No. I told myself when all of that happened, after I allowed myself to research, think it through, I was like, you know what? I'm not even going to worry about it until I actually get a letter. And even if I actually get a letter, then I'll explore it and see like what she could really do because of where I reside, even though I operate globally online. And that's why I found it was really interesting to have Akilah come on the show and just explore the topic and explore this discussion on a digital space. Like, we're in a world where there are really no borders when you're online. In the physical space, there are clear borders. You have to board planes, you have to get visas, you have to have passports. Like, there are borders and boundaries. But on the internet, the world is yours for the taking. And that's why I love online business. I keep saying this, like, when you have a website, when you have an online business, you can do business and trade with anybody, anywhere. And this is why, like, it's also important to like really cover yourself, protect yourself legally from like a business structure perspective and also your brand structure perspective. Well, when I say no, not brand structure, but brand assets perspective, intellectual property. And as you would have learned from this episode, your business name, like your registered legal entity business name, is separate to your brand name. All right. And I think that is as much as I have to say on the topic. That's the outro. I hope you got value from this. I hope that you learned something, has opened up your eyes, and that you really consider and explore the differences between branding. Definitely, I'm going to emphasize, purchase your domain even if you don't have your website yet. As long as you've registered a business, as long as you have a brand name that's trendy or trending or catchy, if you've learned anything from the whole Black Lives Matter and I Can't Breathe being registered, like, if you have something that is of an asset to you, please go register the domains, because those domains are common. What did she say? I made notes. What did she say? It's common law. Just a sec. It's common law rights to a brand name, right? So get that. That's the most affordable way you're gonna get, because that's like you could pay $20 and buy your domain. I keep saying this and I'm going to keep saying it because it's my job to keep saying it. All right. So if you enjoyed this podcast, now is the perfect time to screenshot, because if you made it this far, if you made it to the end, that means you got value from it. So sharing is caring. Share this podcast. Let me know your thoughts so that I can shout you out on the next podcast episode.